Welcome to 10th or Tuesday, episode number 13. Today is the 61st day that the GOP has refused or failed to get rid of Obamacare. So I'm here with Mike Maharrey in the other LA, right?
Right, in the Lexington area.
And I'm here in downtown Los Angeles at our home-built 10th studios. And let's talk about a couple of interesting things moving forward. In our last episode, Mike, we talked about various ways to advance health freedom without waiting on the GOP or whoever to do so in Washington, D.C. The one bill that we really focused on was this direct primary care bill. And maybe you can link in the blog to episode number 12 so people can learn a little bit more about that. But basically, it's so you can set up one-on-one doctor-patient relationships on a monthly fee basis. It's also called a medical retainer agreement outside the state insurance regulatory system. That's going to remove a lot of burdensome regulation, help lower costs, and I think increase quality of care as well. So a couple of good things in your state, Mike. What was the bill number? SB 79? It just got signed by Governor Matt Bevin, I believe.
It was SB 79.
Last week. That just got signed there. And then also two other bills are either on the governor's desk or on the way to it, West Virginia and Montana. SB 100 in Montana, I think HB 2301 in West Virginia. Right, Mike?
That sounds right. I always get all the bill numbers mixed up. But I'm excited about that passing here in my home state of Kentucky because I want to do a direct primary care agreement. That's what I want to do. And
doctors in Kentucky, you have a customer right
yep,
now.
You've got one. So somebody comes here to Lexington, I'll be the first to sign up because I think it's a great way to deliver health care. And I think we talked about it last week or during the last 10th or Tuesday. This is a great cost savings benefit. I mean, it's amazing the cost savings that these guys get going outside of the insurance system. So this is a huge step forward. And it also sets the foundation to do other things within the state to simply ignore all of this federal garbage and create free market healthcare within the state.
You know, the way I could see this playing out in the long run is, and I've never had health insurance as an adult. The last time I had it was, I'm not going to give away my age or anything, but last time I had it was I was on my parents', and that was before the federal government had required parents to have kids on their insurance till they were, well into adulthood. So I've never had it. I've never wanted it. I don't really use it. I tend to use alternative care, which insurance regulations tends to ban going to like a naturopathic doctor. So, I could foresee getting a direct primary care agreement with my naturopath here in Los Angeles. And then maybe, if that were the case, then maybe I would get a catastrophic insurance plan. And this would be way cheaper than the $400 to $600 a month that they want to charge for someone who's self-employed. And then I would be able to see my doctor on a regular basis. They respond to emails. I mean, things that you'd never expect from a doctor 10, 15 years ago.
And people will say, oh, well, that's just going to force the poor out of the health system. The guy in Kansas that Tom Woods interviewed, I think he charges like $55, $60 a month. I mean, that's more than reasonable for basic health care. And he does things like stitches and X-ray. I mean, anything you can do in the office, he covers for that $60 a month. And I think
and if anybody's ever shopped on a healthcare.gov exchange for plans, the bronze or whatever the cheap package is, I mean, you're never going to. It's basically catastrophic insurance. You're not going to get covered for anything. They don't take care of your day-to-day stuff anyway. So it's not, that type of thing doesn't help the poor. And I know you know this, Mike.
Right.
But
and on top of that, my situation, I'm paying a lot of money for health insurance, being self-employed, like you're saying.
Right.
I'm paying a whole lot of money. I can't even see my doctors anymore because my doctors don't take the only health insurance that I can get as an individual in Kentucky. So, so much for Barack Obama telling me you can keep your doctor. Well, no, I couldn't keep my doctor.
Or Paul Ryan.
Right.
Good news in Kentucky, Senate Bill 79. It goes into effect, Mike, you told me earlier, 90 days after the close of the session.
Right.
So sometime this summer that will go into effect. And then two other bills in Montana and West Virginia. We'll be monitoring that over at the 10th Amendment Center blog at blog.10thamendmentcenter.com. Some other really interesting things moving forward as well on surveillance, Mike. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act passed unanimously. I know we reported on the Senate passing it unanimously a few weeks ago, but the House did as well on the last day of the session. So that's off to the governor as well, right?
Yeah, that's a great bill. And not only did it pass both chambers unanimously, there were not any amendments to that bill all the way through the process, which is pretty amazing. And it's a really strong, fully encompassing bill. It bans warrantless stingray surveillance, which are these devices that forces cell phones and other electronic devices to connect to the stingray instead of the cell tower, which allows police to track and monitor everything that's going on with that particular electronic device. And then it also has provisions that prohibit the police from forcing service providers to give up electronic data without a warrant or a subpoena. So a very encompassing electronic data protection bill passes unanimously in both chambers, no amendments, very solid, strong bill, and heading to the governor. And I would be absolutely shocked if the governor doesn't sign that one into law.
Well, at that point, you're going to, well,
Right.
we're gonna watch.
We're watching.
I mean, we've seen weirder things happen.
True.
A similar bill, I don't think it's as broad in its scope and reach. Also on the way to, or on the governor's desk in Montana, it was to address the obtaining of electronic data without a warrant, to prohibit that in most situations. I think it's House Bill 147 or 148.
It's 148.
147 is license plate readers. 149 is something else.
149 is stingrays, basically.
Okay, so 148, that passed by huge numbers, maybe 99-1 in the House, and by a large number in the Senate in Montana. That was from Representative Daniel Zolnikov, and that's on the governor's desk as well, Mike?
It is on the governor's desk, and like you said, it's not quite as broad as the New Mexico bill. It addresses service providers, so police will have to get a warrant to go to Verizon or whatever company to get your electronic data or your email information or whatever information they want to get. So not as expansive, but still a solid bill protecting electronic privacy, and hopefully they can get the 149 passed as well, which was the bill that banned stingrays, because those two were really meant to work together.
Right, and a lot of the stuff that the police do locally, as we've talked before, they collect this information and then they send it upstream through fusion centers or what's known as information sharing environment. It's an agreement where they're just sharing the information back and forth. So something that's collected by a stingray or a cell site simulator in New Mexico gets sent upstream to Washington, D.C., and then through some other information and sharing agreements, it could be used by a law enforcement official in Maine, for example. Right. So you want to cut this off as much as possible. It makes it more difficult for the surveillance state to expand, and these are very positive moves on privacy in both Montana and New Mexico. We'll be watching for governor's signatures or vetoes in both of those states. And then something that just happened, or we just reported on yesterday, I think it actually happened over the weekend, was a Common Core withdrawal bill passing in the West Virginia Senate. I think the vote was 23-8 on Senate Bill 524. That would prohibit the state from continuing any type of I think it just ends the implementation.
Yeah, it's just a flat-out ban. Basically would eliminate Common Core completely in the state. I think it might be one of those. They might have a provision that they're talking about replacing it with these Massachusetts standards, which I
think that was in the original bill, and that got amended out.
That got amended out?
I saw that specifically. Yeah. Specifically, the original report that I know you and Shane Trejo had worked on discussed that. And the process tends to move fast once it gets out of committee in West Virginia. And I was looking at it just yesterday and saw that part was removed out. And I think that's actually probably good to not necessarily. And maybe a Common Core expert can tell us whether that's a good thing or not, to actually say we're going to go with one standard or another, or just say deal with it one piece at a time. Like, let's stop Common Core, and then maybe later on we can figure out for the state what we're going to implement later on. I don't know for sure. I don't know anything about those Massachusetts standards, but it seems like a lot of people who are anti-Common Core seem to be okay with saying, all right, we're going to replace it with this, because that was kind of the national, I don't know if it was a standard or what it was a few years ago, but very positive to see the West Virginia Senate saying no to Common Core. That's moving to the House. I don't know how much longer the session goes there in West Virginia. You told me that in New Mexico they just closed down, so it was good to see that bill passed in that state to end it out. And then another one that you did some reporting on, and thanks to some feedback from Dave Benner up in Minnesota, Dave's a great writer and a fantastic blogger. He does some great articles over at the main site at 10thamendmentcenter.com, but he was feeding us some information on a bill to implement Real ID, Mike. And this has been really problematic. We did a video on how Real ID provides a great example that if you just rely on state governments to nullify, you're probably going to be disappointed. And what we've seen over the years is that so many, 24 some odd states passed resolutions and laws opposing the Real ID Act of 2005. And then years later, now all of a sudden a bunch of them are getting on board saying, okay, now we're going to implement it.
Right.
So this insane flip, even from some of the same people like Governor Butch Otter in Idaho. He's a great example who years ago he signed a bill saying this is inimical to liberty in Idaho. And now just last year, he's like, okay, well, we're going to implement it anyways, as if everyone's going to forget. So tell us what's going on in Minnesota.
Well, in Minnesota, they had one of these bills, and Minnesota was one of the states that did pass legislation absolutely prohibiting implementation of Real ID.
Right.
So they not only just didn't do it, they actually prohibited doing it. This bill that was introduced was intended to repeal that and set the state on the path to implementing the National ID Act. Surprisingly, it failed. It passed the House, I believe, but then got hung up in the Senate. Interestingly, the objection doesn't seem to be Real ID. It seems to be that there's a fight between the Democrats and Republicans about provisions in the bill, rulemaking authority for the governor's office. So the Democrats didn't like the bill because it was going to make it more difficult for the governor to write rules to create driver's license for people who are undocumented. So there's a movement in the state to go ahead and allow people that are undocumented immigrants to have driver's license. Some people argue that this is good because it puts them on the record and at least they have to have a license to drive instead of driving without a license and causing accidents. That's neither here nor there.
You know what's cool in my mind?
What's that?
They can argue about that all day, and then people are going to file amendments, and then the amendment's going to slow down the process, and then they're going to oppose for one reason, and then that kills the bill, and then they have to try to resurrect it. And then the end result is, it looks like I'm looking at the Minnesota website here. It says on the 6th, it failed to pass third reading in the Senate. Like you said, it already had passed the House by a vote of 72 to 58, and then it failed 29 to 38. And then 2 days later, it had to go through another motion to reconsider, and then another motion that same day to lay it on the table, basically put it on hold. So it's once it gets killed, it's pretty tough to resurrect. I know they do this a lot, but it's not going to be an easy thing because then they're going to get into close to the end of the session, and most states are going to talk about budget debates, and then everything else gets forgotten. So as of now, the thing's dead. Right.
They've got until May 22nd, I believe, is when their session is scheduled to end. But the thing that does concern me is the reporting that I read in some of the Minneapolis newspapers and Minnesota newspapers said that there is wide agreement that they should implement Real ID. So
of course,
So that's concerning. So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to strip out everything that has anything to do with rulemaking for the governor and just have a quote unquote clean Real ID bill. So we need to watch that really closely. If you live in Minnesota, you definitely need to be talking to your representatives and your senators and say, hey, we don't want a national ID. And of course, a lot of this has to do with this fear mongering that the feds are spreading. Apparently at the airport there in Minneapolis, they've got signs throughout the concourse saying your driver's license is not going to be valid to get on airplanes come January 2018. That's the stick that the federal government's holding over everybody's head right now. And I don't believe that they'll do it. I mean, there's still a whole lot of states that are out of compliance. I just don't believe that they're going to shut down.
All we have to do is look at the uproar of how many problems the current administration had just at airports from people from other countries. You imagine if they tried to shut down MSP Airport or make it that no one in Minnesota could get on a plane. I mean, this is going to be real messy. We talked about this in a number of reports a few years ago when there was that Texas bill to take on the TSA, and then the feds issued a warning that they may stop all air travel coming into Dallas, Fort Worth, and every other airport. And I think this type of thing, after a while, people are going to stop. Is it Puff the Magic Dragon? Who's huffed and puffed and blew the house down?
That was the big bad wolf and the three little pigs.
Oh yeah, now
you got your Puff the Magic Dragon. That was a song.
Wow, wow! I knew there was huffing and puffing going on.
You're trying to get weed into this episode.
No, we're not doing that conversation today. So that's House Bill number 3, or in Minnesota, it's HF3. Which was dead, but people in Minnesota should keep an eye on it. In fact, we recommend calling your state senator and saying you want them to oppose that bill, and hopefully that'll just draw out the process. And in another year, when we don't see the threats come through from DHS, then there won't be as strong of a push to implement these things. So that's real positive there in Minnesota. And one other thing I want to talk about this week, Mike, is asset forfeiture. We talk about it pretty regularly, right? And there's a couple of new bills that have been filed that we reported on to deal with not only requiring a criminal conviction or a higher standard on a state level, but also dealing with the federal loophole. Why don't you get everybody up to speed again on what that federal loophole is?
So the federal loophole, it's really a way for the state and local police to circumvent more restrictive asset forfeiture laws and still be able to cash in on the money that's available when these assets are forfeited to the state. So in a lot of states, we've seen reforms where the money goes into the general fund now, or they require a conviction. So what the states will do is, what the police will do is they'll just pass it off to the federal government, let the federal government do the asset forfeiture, and then they collect under what's called equitable sharing. It's a program through the feds. They can get up to 80% of the funds back, and bypasses the more stringent state law. So it's very important for any asset forfeiture reform to have language in the bills that specifically close this loophole. Now, the good news is last year we saw a lot of asset forfeiture reform bills that did not address the loophole. And I think almost all of them this year have addressed that loophole. So that's a positive step. Now the difficult part. And
even the one in New Hampshire, we were kind of following a bill. I think it was, I don't know what the number was, last session, where they didn't address the federal loophole. And I had heard back from some activists there saying basically like, look, this is all we can get through, but we're going to deal with it next year. And my first thought was, yeah, right. But sure enough, they've already gotten House Bill 614 passed out of the state house that all the bill does is say that, they're basically opting out of this federal equitable sharing program in most situations. I think it's like 80+%. So this is a very positive move. And we have just some new reports on bills filed in both South Carolina and Maine. South Carolina, I think it's House Bill 3918. I don't know the Maine bill off the top of my head. But then also later this week, there's going to be a hearing and a very important do or die vote on House Bill 2477 in Arizona. It has a lower standard to address asset forfeiture on a state level, right, Mike? But
right.
It does address the federal loophole.
Right. It does not require a criminal conviction, so it doesn't go as far as many of the reforms, but it does, I believe, increase the level of proof, the burden of proof for the state. There's some various other reforms to help protect property owners, and it does address the loophole. So I think it's going to be a close vote. There's been huge law enforcement lobbying against this bill behind the scenes. So it's very important. Another thing that I want to point out, and I'll link to this in the show notes page. I did a report last week about a hearing in Tennessee on asset forfeiture, and if you read the quotes, you can see just how intense the law enforcement lobbying is. But this one was kind of fun because the committee chairman seemed to favor the bill, and he ripped one of the law enforcement officers ripped two of them pretty good in his comments. So that's fun. So you can check that out. I have some great quotes in there, but it will give you an idea of just how intense law enforcement lobbying is against these bills and how difficult it is to get them passed.
Well, in Arizona you and I have joked about it, and it's real sad. I think Arizona is government by police.
Yeah,
or by
it
police
really is.
lobby is the best way. So if the police lobby say yes or no on a bill, almost every time it is voted yes or no in committee or on the floor, or whether it's going to be a veto. The police lobby makes the final decision on most things in Arizona. So this is a very rare situation where we see a bill moving forward even though the police lobby has been strongly against it. Now, mind you, on the state level restrictions on asset forfeiture, this is a small to moderate improvement over the status quo. Dealing with the federal issue is a huge improvement, but on the state level, it's only a small improvement, and still it's got huge opposition from all law enforcement lobby organizations there in Arizona. So on the 23rd, we're hoping for a yes vote on House Bill 2477. So if you live in the state, we've got a blog posted with some action items on who you can call, including the phone numbers. I hope that you'll take maybe 5-10 minutes and just call 5-6 people and say vote yes on HB 2477. And of course, we'll be reporting on all these things as we get updates.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize too much how important it is for folks in Arizona to make those phone calls, because that's what's gotten this bill moving forward in the first place. There's been a huge grassroots effort.
Right.
I've been kind of monitoring that. I've gotten a lot of the emails, and I've watched these folks. They've really aggressively lobbied. They've been doing vote counts. They've gone to the state capitol. They've been lobbying these lawmakers. From what I understand, it looked like it wasn't even going to get a committee hearing, and these folks have managed to put enough pressure on to get it actually heard in committee. So that shows the power of this kind of grassroots activism, and it can overcome these lobbyists. But it's absolutely imperative that folks get involved and take the 10 minutes, make the phone calls.
And I know there's a big coalition working on it in Arizona, but of course, no one better than our own two great team members there, Joel Alcott and Michael Gibbs. These guys are tireless,
awesome.
and all of their time is donated and volunteered. So thank you to those two guys, not just on asset forfeiture, but on all kinds of things, sound money, gun rights, all kinds of stuff in Arizona, more stuff than we even follow, Mike.
Yeah.
So
they're
it's
awesome.
really
Those two
important.
guys.
So when people dedicate themselves, they can actually make good things happen. And of course, as always, dedicate yourself to us. Go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, and you can support the work that we do here. And of course, you can also go to blog.10thamendmentcenter.com to follow all of our reports on a day-to-day basis. We'll be back next week, and thank you so much for watching here at 10th or Tuesday.